Hey, MBA hopefuls, welcome to MBA Waves. I'm Eric Lucrezia, your host for today. And today on episode 143, we're going to talk about test anxiety. We've got two great speakers with us today from different parts of the world. We got Dr. Ben Bernstein and Scott Carroll. Of course, we have my fabulous co-hosts, Bara Sapir and Krithika Srinivasan. And don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to keep us able to continue all this great free content on MBA Waves. Today on 143, we're going to talk about what exactly is test anxiety, how to determine if it's plaguing you, whether it be GMAT, GRE, SATs, MCAT, or whatever test is giving you grief, and how you can either beat it or at least manage your stress to unlock your success. You know, this episode, we've got, I think, well over 100 people registered, which has got to be a record for MBA Waves. So I don't know if it's something going on in the world today, wars, political turmoil, pandemics, whatever, but people are stressed. How are you guys feeling?
Really good. Glad to be here.
That's good. That's good. Welcome, everybody. So let's just jump right into it. We all feel nervous before something important, especially when it's high stakes like the GMAT or GRE. It's to be expected, right? So how is test anxiety different? And either one of you who want to get started first, we'll go around the room.
Well, I'm happy to get started. I am a psychologist who focuses on stress. I'm not a therapist. I'm a performance psychologist. So I work with people in high stress, high performance situations. The difference of test anxiety with other kinds of anxiety is actually often connected to the result, which is people imagining what's going to happen when they get the grade or they get the score. And often they imagine things that are pretty negative, like they'll lose a scholarship, or they won't get into college, or they won't get into business school, or any number of things. So there's a lot of future thinking that actually is what's sparking the anxiety. Of course, other things can be too, lack of preparation, not enough real solid knowledge of the content, those kinds of things. But mostly test anxiety is related to worry about the outcome.
And also,
yeah.
I'd also add, like, it's not just the future that people are worried about. It's if they've had any past experience that's colored where they're going, right? So they might have had, it could have been something as easy as not feeling comfortable balancing their checkbook, and all of a sudden they're asked to do math, right? And they just get these worrisome fears because they've not proven themselves in some way, and then these things trigger them.
Yeah, exactly. And related to that are just worry about what's going to actually be on the test. That connected to what you just said, that they may be facing something that they really don't have the confidence in answering well.
True, and to reply to something that Ben was saying about the anxiety about the future, about what's going to happen. My experience with the tests like GMAT, GRE, because they're all timed exams, students focus far too much in the anxiety situations, of course, on the time. Oh, I'm not going fast enough. I'm not going to finish the section. And then we combine that with what Ben was saying, and it's like, oh, what score am I going to get, and so on and so forth. And they're using so many neurons thinking about anything except what they should be thinking about at that moment, which is the question on the screen.
Exactly. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, what you're all saying so resonates with what my clients tell me when they don't get their targeted score. And you just feel, you can actually feel that they're so stressed and worried, as if they believe that this is their entire lives. So can you talk to more about what are the symptoms of test anxiety and what triggers them?
Sure. I want to just comment on something you all said, which is this obsession with score. We all want students or candidates to score well. They want to score well. That's why they come to us. However, they're so focused on the score that they lose what they really need to focus on, which is the present moment of answering questions, of being right in the present moment. So symptoms of test anxiety are worry, or it can be physical, mental, psychological, or even in the spirit. Spirit, you feel, exhausted. You just don't feel you can handle this, or you're just overamped. I'm absolutely going to nail this thing. In the mind, it can be, I just don't know this well enough. I'm not going to do well. A lot of past stuff repeating. And in the body, there are so many different symptoms, and they're quite individual, from sweating to headaches to stomach aches to not being able to sleep. All of that any of those would be symptoms, and they do pile up.
People might go too fast. They might go too slow. And like exactly what Ben said, physical issues could be anything from a headache to just not feeling well, to needing to go to the bathroom, sweating, feeling cold, just not having a kind of calmness and an assuredness about oneself.
So, go ahead, Ben, please.
No, I think you asked also about, did you ask also about what you can do about them? Is that part of the question?
That's what I was going to ask next. Like, what are some common coping strategies that you would recommend to manage, anxiety during test prep?
Well, a couple of things I would say. First of all, early identification is the most important, because you don't want it to grow, right? This is kind of like something that just keeps spreading if you don't take care of it. I have to say, Eric, if you don't mind, I'm not into coping strategies, and I'm not into managing. I'm into reducing stress. What are tools that you need to actually reduce the stress? So the first thing is, if you notice physically that you're getting wound up, is you have to learn how to calm yourself down. All the work that I do is based on three things: training students how to be calm, how to be confident, and how to be focused. And there are specific tools for each one. So learning the tools that you need to really calm yourself down. When you start feeling agitated, what do you do when you see an item on a test and your confidence is tested? You think, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. What do you actually do? So you've got to learn what I call performance tools, which are what happens when you actually cross the threshold to take the test. What you do. It's not the same thing as practice. It's a whole different ballgame when you're in the test room. And I'd love to hear what Scott has to say about this too, and Bara. We tend to focus with students. We have to focus with students on learning the content and learning how the test is structured, and learning a facility with the material. But there are performance tools when students cross over the threshold that they simply really don't train people, and that's what I'm doing all the time. So
sorry. See, before we pivot over to Bara and Scott, I just wanted to ask a qualifier. As you started off, when we speak about strategies, you spoke about it's not so much about management for you, but about reducing. And could you make the difference for the listeners who might not know what you mean then?
Well, I don't have the dictionary. In fact, I looked this up in the dictionary when I was working with somebody the other day. Managing is more like, I'm going to manage all these things. I'm going to kind of arrange them. I'm going to get them in the right order. Reducing is reducing, like bringing down the stress level. It's very different than managing. So that makes sense. I'll get the dictionary definitions one at the tip of my tongue.
All right.
It sounds like it's not going away when you manage something. You're just putting it in some sort of like way to cope with it. Like, if you have a messy room and you just kind of push things in different piles, you're not really cleaning your room and cleaning things out. But when you clear out your room, and you're getting rid of stuff. So it's
beautiful.
Dialing down, turning down the heat.
Yeah. And I think that it's true that the first step is definitely knowing the exam, knowing the material that's going to be on it, because that would eliminate a whole part of the stress, which is, oh, I don't know what's going to be on the exam, or, oh, I don't know how to do this type of question. And for a lot of people, it's it's a big barrier to get over, oh, I don't know how to do this type of question. And instead of saying, I'll just hope that question doesn't show up, which students really do, it's much easier to say, well, let's learn how to do this question. And it eliminates a problem. It is true also when you get onto the actual exam. I think there's this baggage. There's this, I don't know, monsters from the past or something, where suddenly they're in a test situation and it's like the score and my timing and how am I, oh my God, I got that question wrong. And it sounds like something that could probably need another type of work while preparing for the exam. Even having that practice, even being able to do a practice test and say, okay, make this just like test day.
Right.
I find getting students to do that can be very important.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a great point that, monsters of the past, I have a number of people come to me and start off with saying, I'm a terrible test taker. And I say to them right away, well, if you're a terrible test taker, why are you coming to me? Because you're a terrible test taker. Rather than say, I've had some really bad experiences in the past, and I definitely don't want to repeat that. That's a very different sentence. It's a very different mindset to that. And, apropos of what Scott was just saying, what about students who invariably will see an item on the test, on the actual test, that they haven't seen the same way before? This is how good tests are constructed. They're testing your ability to think, to be in the present, to really put together what you do know with what's in front of you. So if you freak out when you see something, I can't figure this out, I don't know what to do, and you have no tools to work your way through that so that you can come to an answer, preferably the right answer, you get really stuck, and then the clock is ticking, and then you keep freaking out, and you keep freaking out. So it's just a vicious cycle that keeps repeating.
And to speak to the point about I'm a bad test taker proclamation, I just wanted to bring about an anecdote of one student today. That student has changed their test date for the fourth time, reschedule the test date for the fourth time, right? And every time they have this fear hey, I had to take my, the big college entrance exam twice. I had a gap year. I literally spent so much time, right? And this is literally the fourth time they've done it, and they've already spent more than a year on this big test. So, and you also alluded to it. So, how does someone get out of this mindset or get the shift?
The easiest way to say is, how long do you want this to go on? I mean, do you want to keep doing this forever, or would you rather get out of it? And invariably people will say they'd rather get out of it, but they don't know how. No one's shown them how. So all they know is to repeat. We're human beings. We're creatures of habit. We're going to repeat until Freud said, we repeat until we remember. Remember, do you really want this to continue? Some of that's also, I have to say, in my experience, some of that's also a delay tactic. There's a lot riding on big exams, which is that it is a threshold to whatever's coming next. And that itself can cause a lot of anxiety. What is my career going to be? Will I really be able to do well in this school? On and on and on. And that alone can also be I don't want to take the test. I don't want to take the test. So I think, careful talking about all that stuff starts with what do you want for yourself? What would you like to, what state would you like to be in?
I think also, though, the irony is that by delaying it, the students also having some agency, right? And so they're actually self-soothing by doing this delay tactic, even though, thinking oh, is this coping or managing? I mean, in a way it is, because it's self-soothing to have that agency to change the date of the test. It's probably, they feel, the only time that they might have some control over a situation that they feel out of control.
It's such a great point, except I would add it's oddly self-soothing.
Oh, it's so odd. It's I mean, it's so counter to what's really happening, because the more that you have control over understanding the material and feel the word that you keep saying, Ben, present, you said it a couple of times. It's so important. It's the most important thing, to be present with the question, it's a dance, right? We often say that on MBA Waves, that this is all a dance, and you get to lead, but you get to respond, right? It's not just about plowing through and changing your to the test. So,
yeah, I mean, I think you could definitely, before we get into some strategies for during the test, like how you can cope while taking, still talking about the prep period, right? Which can last anywhere from the minimum 2 months usually for GMAT, GRE, up to 4, 5, 6, depending on where you come from, depending on what your native language is or your career, are the two main factors that influence what sections you usually do better or worse in.
Yeah.
And I think that delaying the test, like Bara was saying, having some agency, like it sort of like gives you a false sense of control. Like ultimately, you need to do this thing, and you know, it's sort of, I don't know, a short-term sense of satisfaction and relief when it's ultimately coming. I always tell people, think ahead. Like, when is the best time of the year that tends to be the least full for you? Is summer a good time because it's more slow, or do you have a lot of travel and fun things happening? Is it better during Christmas break? Or, you know, think about that and then just kind of count backwards and figure out when the best time to start is. But it also, what you guys have been saying has got me thinking about how just some people self-identify, or perhaps they're diagnosed as an anxious person. People who are consider themselves just generally anxious. And are there different coping mechanisms, or coping strategies for someone who is diagnosed or self-diagnosed as anxious versus someone else? What are you guys' thoughts on that?
My experience. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, you, Scott, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say my experience is probably different from Ben's, because I get the stress of the typical students that, you know, like typical test anxiety, getting stuck on questions, spending 10 minutes on a question, these kinds of things. Whereas I would assume that Ben is working probably with people who have got more complications regarding the kind of stress that they can bring to this. For my students, is mostly just regular, good old fashioned, it's the day of the test, and oh, it's question number 3 and I have to answer this question. And so I'm going to waste too much time answering this question and ruining the rhythm for the whole thing. Or I actually, Eric, would you please remind me what the question was? Because I want to get lost.
Are there different coping strategies for people who are like kind of like diagnosed or self-diagnosed as anxious versus someone who's not?
Yeah, I think trying to take importance away from the exam. I know we were talking before earlier about, you know, it's an important test and so on and so forth. I don't usually tell students that it is. I usually say, you know, this is just a standardized test. It does teach, it does test like lateral thinking, different ways to get around a question. It does test content, but it's not going to get you into whatever university you want to get into. It's just like ticking the box. It's like, oh, but the average score and so on. It's like, okay, that's true. But how are your academic scores? So I guess in a way, and I'm just thinking this now, it's taking a little bit of the pressure off of the exam and distributing a little bit more of, you know, you've got a whole profile. You've got your activities, you've got your work experience, you've got what you did in school, you've got your grades, and this exam score, if you get this score or over this score, you're not going to have to worry about it. If you get this score, it doesn't mean that it's all over. So go in, get the best score that you can, and then we take it from there. So, I mean, it's really just sort of, it's kind of like people that get stressed when they have to do an interview.
Sure.
It's exactly like it's exactly like
I would add to that that's true. What Scott was saying is absolutely true for everyone. And when a person has a diagnosable condition of some kind of anxiety disorder, that needs a different kind of be addressed differently. I make that very clear to people when they come to me. As a licensed psychologist, I have to make a distinction between what I do, which is much more like coaching or is educational, than therapy. And if a person really needs therapy, which is they need to really have this ongoing anxiety that they experience addressed, that has to be done in a different way. Some of that, as Scott's saying, some of that can really be addressed in bringing the whole experience back down to earth. And that can help everybody. I think what Scott said is totally true. But however, if there's more going on, the person may need counseling, therapy, medication That's actually out of my purview. I don't mix the two, for that reason. It makes the situation very much more complex. So if a person who's listening does have some kind of generalized anxiety, meaning they're feeling anxious not just about the test, I strongly encourage you to get in contact with anyone that might be able to help you. So that could be a therapist, a counselor. If you're already at a university, almost every university has counseling service. Talk to a friend that you know who might be in therapy. Get help for it, because you can get help. There's so many different ways of getting help for anxiety. I'm sure we would all encourage.
That would be from our sponsor, BetterHelp, if only. Anyway, okay.
You know, Eric, actually, I've got one thing to pop in on, because I think it's interesting that because the three of us handle anxiety differently, and I'm not a psychotherapist, but I do handle it in terms of being more like a coach also. But I'm looking at when students come to me, I'm looking at it as what are the symptoms and how do we get rid of the symptoms and how do we get rid of them fast, right? Like I'm not looking for a long process the way a psychologist or a psychiatrist would look at it. But even if someone has generalized anxiety, it's good for me to know that. But there's symptoms, and we can actually train the mind to see the symptoms in a different way, whether that's through growth mindset or just a positive reframing, so that if someone's anxious about the test, I would say something to them like, wow, this must be really important to you. Let's talk about why it's important. So instead of it being something that
negative
makes someone really like clam up and feel terrible, it's like, oh yeah, this does feel important to me. And then giving them exercises both on the overall sense of going in and feeling the three things that Ben had said: calm, focused, and confident. I'm also looking at what Scott had mentioned is what happens when you see that question 3 and you're freaking out. It's like, I'm going to give them tools in that moment to, it's called pattern disrupt, right? I'm going to stop that anxiety from cascading into affecting more than just that question, but the rest of the section and the whole test.
You bring up a good point, Bara. Like, just that for me, anxiety and excitement is kind of the same energy,
right?
But perceived positively or negatively. And if you're in a negative space with that energy, it's going to stress you out. It's going to feel like anxiety could be paralyzing. And if you just reframe it, it's like, you know what? I'm excited to get this test done. I'm going to get a scholarship from it. I'm going to get admitted to whatever school. And it's going to be done soon. Like having that positive frame of mind, I think, in life in general, gets us through a lot of tough stuff.
And being present in the moment, like what is going to bring you back to the moment so that you can actually be with the question, what it's asking of you and who you want to be. And not just the right question sometimes, but the least wrong, right? Because it's not, sometimes it's not like you can't get the right one, but you know what? This one is the least wrong.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is like awareness, training and tools, to help with these. I have a question like, how can someone figure out that they're having the normal level of anxiety versus a heightened state of anxiety? How can they figure it out for themselves?
Well, when you say a normal level of anxiety, I would reframe that a little bit. We know from over 100 years of research that a certain level of stress is actually necessary for optimal performance. So it's a bell curve relationship, right? Too little stress, performance goes down. Too much stress, but just the right amount of stress. So I wouldn't call that anxiety. I think Eric was a little more connected. It's more about arousal. In other words, the initial studies were actually done about arousal. How do you know is that if you slip into the too much stress, decision making is going to be harder. You're going to have worry. There's going to be a lot of other factors coming in that are impeding, what we were talking about staying in the present. So I think, if you're able to really think clearly and if you're able to relate a test item to what you've seen before and able to figure something out. But if you start to back off, if you start to like, I can't do this, and you start to worry, that would be indicative of, too much stress. Mm-hmm. And that what Bara was saying is that the more we can all of us work with students to have them identify these things very quickly and get back to the problem at hand, So the tools that we give them to do that are really essential so they can stay in the present. Tests are not just testing the content. They're testing your ability to think, testing your ability to stay in the present. They're testing your ability to deal with challenge. I mean, it's not just like the right answer thing. That's a very cultural misunderstanding about tests. But there's more to it than that.
One of the things I always say is tests don't only measure what you know, they also measure how well you take tests.
Yeah, true. And as well, how you do under pressure in general. I mean, the thing with these tests, and I say a lot to like a lot of students that are doing GMAT, all the MBA students and everything, it's like, your boss comes into your office and gives you these 3 documents and says, okay, you got 15 minutes to read them. You got to go in the next room and do a report, basically to a whole committee of people. What do? You do it. So you guys are absolutely right. It tests a lot of other things than just the right answer. And as long as I'm here, I would like to make that point that, yeah, it isn't always about finding the right answer. If you can get rid of the 4 not right answers, that's a wonderful thing about multiple choice.
When people come to me, I will tell them, they'll say, I want to get a 1550 on the SAT or 34 on the ACT or whatever on the GMAT or GRE. And I say, look, I want you to get that too. But the reason I'm doing this work is that you learn some tools, life tools, to deal with challenge. We should have all been learning these tools in the 2nd grade, but we haven't. And so we're filling our education. I'm going to do a 15-second rant on education. We're just filling our education with totally meaningless stuff when what we should be teaching people is how to deal with life challenges, because this is one of them. And they're going to, Scott's so beautiful, like, yeah, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to deal with this. So, so I think we can really help students a lot by helping them to see what the possibilities are in the test, rather than like just be freaked out about it.
The thing what Scott was talking about earlier, like the test actually teaches you things too. A lot of people consider the GMAT or the GRE to be your first MBA course. Warms up your brain after you've not been in a classroom for a number of years. This is sponsored by Nokia.
Sorry.
All right. So anyways, kind of lost my train of thought, but it teaches you how to think laterally is what Scott was saying. And if you treat the test as an opportunity to learn something new and to be better than before you were before you started taking or preparing for the test, that's such a great frame of mind to be in. Of course, that takes time, and it comes back to what I feel like we end up coming back to all the time: is it's never too soon, it's never too early to start your preparation. Because it takes a lot of time to really go into the research and figure out the schools that are best for you. To know yourself, by the way, sitting in front of a therapist, I'm sure that's like you would agree. Like it's a journey getting to know yourself. Who am I? What do I really want in this life? What am I good at? And then finding the schools that are the right match. And then GMAT prep is a whole other world. So thinking about how long things really take. Often it's a couple of years, the whole journey. And so take that time. And if you've got an MBA in your plans, start right away. All right. So what about during the test? If we could pivot to like some suggestions or techniques that you would suggest when you're actually in the test mode, you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So I just recap a little bit. There are 3 optimal states for any challenging situation. We're talking about test 1. To be calm, to be confident, and to be focused. Okay, calm, confident, focused. They correspond to the body, the mind, and the spirit. That's the totality of you when you're taking the test. So I like to use this model. Check it out. It's a 3-legged stool: calm, confident, and focused. When all 3 legs are strong, this is a really sturdy platform. But when one of the legs starts to go, you start to feel nervous. This whole thing is going to get very tilty and you're going to fall off. Okay, so you're asking specifics. One of the things I noticed is that when students take tests, and I would encourage everybody to really pay attention to this, when students take tests, very often the first thing that happens, if you watch carefully, they'll open the test booklet or whatever is or on the screen, and if you watch carefully, you'll see them actually go like this. I exaggerated. What they're doing is they're holding their breath. Okay, so when you hold your breath, it's an immediate disconnect, and it turns on your sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. You keep doing that for 3 hours, and you're going to be exhausted, and you're going to be really fried. So what people can do is, it's so simple, but I've trained so many students to do this. I encourage everybody who's watching to do it. I call it 3-point breathing. Exhale before you read a question. Exhale before you read the answers. Exhale after you bubble in an answer or check it off. So 3 times exhaling, and then it repeats right away again. This will directly cut into the holding the breath thing that happens, which people are not even aware of. So take that to heart. But this requires, something Eric said just before, this requires practice. You can't just do it on the day of the test. If you haven't really practiced, if you haven't said in any of the tools, remember there are 9 tools, that's one of them, the most important probably. If you haven't practiced, it's useless to, people will come to me 2 weeks before a test. I need to, I'm freaked out. I'll say, well, come next time if you don't score the way you want to. Because I can't just, this is not a, just not a quick fix thing. We're talking about habits.
It's like more like muscle memory, I guess.
Well, that's a good analogy. I think a lot of what I do, I've been coaching athletes for years, and a lot of what I do is also connected to sports psychology. This is what athletes do. Athletes train themselves to be in the present, right? When they talk about it, they say they're in the zone, but it sounds kind of woo-woo. It's not woo-woo. It's like you learn how to become aware that you're getting stressed, and then you have tools to get yourself back. So yeah, it's very connected to that.
So the tools that I use are different than Ben's, and they actually can be used right beforehand. And so what I teach, if a student, first of all, the breathing is amazing because you're dealing with self-soothing again, right? So we all have to breathe, but if we could breathe in a way that actually regulates our emotions, it's super helpful. And even if you're not taking a test, it's super helpful. But what I do, if a student sees a question and they're having issues, I have them notice, and I have to teach it to them beforehand. I have them notice what direction that intensity is coming from. And often it will come up in a circle. This is a neurolinguistic programming technique. So I have them notice what direction that's going in. And then I have them in their mind, imagine it's going in another direction and have it push it in the other direction, take it outside of themselves, like about the size of a basketball. Imagine it's going in the opposite direction, and then think of a time when they felt incredibly, they were laughing, but it was really inappropriate, because that cuts through the experience of the intensity, and they'll laugh and it will break that sort of charge and that enchantment of the negativity. Then think of someone they love and a place they feel calm, and then put that basketball kind of movement back in them, breathe, and then get back to the question. Once they learn how to do this, it's they can do it within like 3 to 10 seconds and then just get back. But it's a way of disrupting that thought. And so I think combined, Ben, this would actually work really great.
Well, what we're both talking about is habit change, right? So
yeah,
we all have habits, and we have a lot of habits around taking tests. And I don't call them good and bad habits. I call them productive and unproductive. There are many unproductive habits we have around test taking. What Bara's talking about, what I'm talking about, I'm sure what Scott does, is all about teaching productive habits, things that can really produce the result that you want, rather than keep going in this spiraling out direction.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with these things that you have both said, I feel like extremely like grassroots practical as far as the exam goes, which is like, I always tell students, okay, on any section of an exam, generally, and obviously it depends on the length of the exam or the section, I would say, there are 3 questions that if you have no idea, if you don't know what to do with them, you're allowed to skip. Pick your favorite letter, keep moving. They don't have to skip 3 questions. Sometimes just knowing that they have that is enough to get them through the section. Second thing I always say is that no question is worth 3 or more minutes of your time. So again, try to eliminate the worst answers, go for the best. And you can even apply that in a lot of math questions, because there's usually one or two that if you half understand the question, you can say, okay, it's doubtful that it's going to be this one or this one. And 1 out of 3 is better than 1 out of 5. And then the final thing that I would always say is the time is not the goal. The time is the result of doing what you need to be doing better, more efficiently, staying on task, and then, of course, bringing in all the things that both of you said before. Kind of stop worrying about the time, which, of course, is hard, and you don't want it to go the other way where they don't think about the time at all. So maybe a couple of stopping points, or that's not the word I'm looking for. How to break up the exam or the section into 2 parts or 3 parts, where you say, all right, I'm at the halfway mark and I'm on this question, and can say, all right, I'm going a little bit fast. All right, but now the questions are going to get a little harder, so maybe I'm going to have to slow down a bit, but more or less I'm okay. Or, all right, I'm a little bit behind, so I want to pick up the pace. 5 seconds less per question, so they don't freak out about it and go in the entire opposite direction. Just little things. I'm all about keeping it soft, nothing too extreme, 5 seconds here, don't take 3 minutes on a section. You can't do that question, don't let it bother you. Go on to the next question. And of course, now I want to know what you guys give in all your detailed sessions, because I'm interested.
Well, I think everything you're saying makes total sense. I think it's connected with these most important things, with knowing the test. How is the test structured? What is the time you should have available? How many questions per section? So I think that, it's like running a cross-country course. You know the course. You know what you're headed toward. I would add something to that, which is we were touching on this, but alluding to taking breaks through the course of the test. Now, most students won't even suggest that. They go, I don't have the time. But first of all, some tests you do get a break. But in other tests where you don't actually have a break, the advantage to something like just closing your eyes for 3 seconds can really be helpful. Right? The eyes are connected to the nervous system. The central vision which you're using when we're reading is connected to the sympathetic nervous system. It's what amps you up. You have to turn that switch off. You can't have both on at the same time. Turn that off, close your eyes, take a deep exhale. You just have reset your system to using your eyes again. So it's simple things like that can be integrated into what you're saying, Scott, but it can be so helpful to people. How do you leave something? How do you leave a question that you're having difficulty with? Acknowledging that you're having difficulty with. How do you leave it and not carry it over into the next question? There are ways to do that. And it's wonderful. It's really helpful for students to learn how to do that. That's imagining just, I'm going to say again, to the point of being nauseating, you have to practice this stuff. You can't just have it it's not an idea, it's practice. And I think one of the things I have found in terms of students practicing is that, again, they're just looking at the score over and over and over again. And to underline something that Scott just said, score is not a goal, score is an outcome. This is really important. The score is an outcome. The goal is to do your best, to learn the material, to be facile with the material, to handle the time. Those are the goals. Score is an outcome. You don't have control over the outcome in the same way. Same thing with athletes. They don't control winning. Like, winning is not a goal. Winning is an outcome. And I think the more we can see that, this will really help them to get into the present, learn what they know, and then they can achieve a score that they want to achieve.
I want to piggyback on what both of you have said and talk about the practice piece. Has a lot to do with it's kind of exposure therapy, right? The more you experience things over and over again, they lose their charge in the way they might have originally. So it's a technique. Like if someone is scared of water or pools or heights, one technique is to make the person experience it a little more and more and more over time so that they really feel comfortable with it. And along with this is that I know that the more I do something in discrete points of time, my body has a memory of what that time actually feels like. So I don't have to think about that time. The student doesn't have to think about the time, but they'll feel the time. They'll start to gain a kind of memory that they actually don't need to rely on looking at a clock or watch, because they know at a certain point. It's like, ask anyone who works out, like they know at what point they're at the halfway point. It's a way of knowing. So it's trusting yourself and learning how to trust yourself and getting more tools to trust yourself. And I totally agree. The score is not the goal. It's a destination, just like the job interview is not the goal, right? It's really about who you are, showing up who you are to see if it's a good fit. You might think you want the job, but really you want to know how you feel in these different scenarios. And you just want to be your best self, ultimately, right? You want to be your best self. You want to show up who you are authentically, and having tools to do that makes it more enjoyable, ultimately.
Great points here. And, and Bara, like, I think you spoke about fear. And Scott, I'm sure that you see this often as well, that certain overrepresented applicant pools need to take the test twice or more in order to reach their targeted scores and so on. So do you think the fear becomes lesser when they go for the attempts, or is it increasing, or how do they tackle that situation?
It depends on what they get on the first score.
Yeah.
It depends on what they get, because if they don't get the score that they want the first time, and that was already an anxiety situation, I've seen students do this, like 4 tests, one after the other, boom, 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 and they're getting lower scores than if they had never seen the exam before in their lives.
Right. I would agree with that 100%. I've recently coached a person taking a licensing exam in California to be a psychologist. It's her 8th time taking the test. You know how expensive that is, and how much, just emotional toll that takes. And it gets worse and worse. And a large part of it is because it was never properly diagnosed. What she was missing, what she was doing that was unproductive. I think this leads to Bara's point about if you're afraid of something like exposure. What I would add to that is that make sure the exposure is to the thing that you're afraid of. It's not just water. It might be that water's going to come up your nose, or it might be that something is going to attack you. I mean, I couldn't go in the ocean when I was a child because I fear sharks off Long Island, So I think practice and exposure are important, but in the practice, I think what's really important, and I don't think this is done enough, is really digging into what did you miss in that question? What did you miss? Where is some of your knowledge missing? Where did you read too quickly? To just really dig in, because that will show you a lot. The more specific, the better. It's like a recipe. I mean, you put too much salt in something or too much this, it's going to ruin the recipe, just the right amount. So I just think that we're, again, a broken record, we're so focused on the score that we miss the forest for the tree, or the trees for the forest, or something like that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
We miss it. And it's always something specific. And if you get specific, it seems like so much more doable. You can handle this.
I do want to say that Jaws probably is one of the worst movies that was made, because sharks are incredible creatures, and it's amazing what a disservice that movie has done to the shark community. Just throwing that in there.
Especially for New Yorkers who used to go to Long Island of the beach. It was like the worst.
I'm from Long Island, and I love the beach, but I'm not swimming with the sharks. Did you grow up there, Ben, in Long Island?
No, Brooklyn, but we would go out to the island for the beach.
Of course. Krithika, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I was just thinking about, the particular example you brought up, Ben. about how this person didn't know about it. Do you think that somebody having test anxiety would have other issues later on in their performance in, say, business school or grad school or wherever they're headed towards?
I'm not sure what your question is. I want to say yes. Partly it's because what I found in 50 years of teaching, that one of the things smart students learn, and this is not a good life tool, is how to get by with the least amount at the last possible moment. Okay? I'll say that again. Smart people learn how to get by with the least amount at the last possible moment. This is death to test taking. Okay, and no athlete would go and compete in the Olympics if they didn't work for years and years and years and years. You can't do that. This is a terrible life skill that we just get trained in because we game the system, basically. So yeah, it does apply to a lot of things. You know, if you go into business school and you're into the least last phenomenon thing, you know, you're not going to do as well. And I have to correct this with many students that I work with. Their study skills are terrible. Their preparation skills are awful. Right? They just don't take the time that they need. You know, you have a paper due in 2 weeks. You don't start it 2 nights before. You start it 2 weeks before. You work incrementally, right? A baby doesn't come out of the womb and run across the room. Everything is built on that model. Small, manageable steps get you to where you want to go. So, yeah.
Unless you're a giraffe. Unless you're a giraffe, you come out running.
So I don't know if that answers your question, Krithika, but it sounds like it does. I hope it does.
So I was just alluding to how somebody with undiagnosed test anxiety, or even like somehow they make it through the test, but then later on take it to the business school, and it leads to other possible like imposter syndrome or other things in school.
Well, untreated, anything is going to lead to more of whatever that was. I mean, we tend to keep growing, even if it's in an unproductive direction. So, you know, if you're having test anxiety now, nail it. This is the time to deal with it, right? Find somebody who can really work with you, help you. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. You know, you've got 3 people on here who do this, you know, pretty much for a living, and are compassionate people who want this to be an easier, more successful experience for somebody. Again, experience. You come out feeling better about yourself. You come out feeling like you learned something about the subject. All of the things that we've been talking about. Test preparation should be a growing experience, right?
So much we talk about how the MBA journey, I'm talking about doing the program, let alone applying for it, is such a journey of self-discovery. Like it's just as much of a personal development thing as it is professional. I mean, our jobs and our personal lives are so intertwined, right? The choices we make, where we go, and so on. And it's interesting to think about how deep this can go, right? And as professionals and what the 3 of you do, you could have someone in front of you, and it's just blaringly obvious to you guys that this person might want to look into therapy for whatever reason. There's an underlying issue, whether it's anxiety, depression, self-esteem issues, whatever. And of course, that's going to carry into the rest of their lives. I like the way you put it, Ben, about like if you have an issue, it's just going to continue to grow in that direction. Like it's so true. And so it might mean like, hang on, maybe I need to go through therapy before I look into doing an MBA, and then I'll be a better applicant and professional afterwards, you know, if you have the time.
It's possible. I would be cautious about that, in that so many issues that we have, and I say we have, you know, are resolvable if we can talk about them with somebody who is, you know, compassionate, an older person, sister, sibling, a brother, you know, a minister. I'm not sure. I think what you're mentioning, Eric, is important. If you really keep repeating the same thing, it's so unproductive, and you just can't break through, and you don't think anybody can help you. Yeah, you should go to a professional who is, you know, really looking at you objectively and helping you. But there's so many steps along the way to work through issues that I really would encourage people to do. A lot of people have confidence issues. The reason they have confidence issues is because they don't want to talk about having confidence issues. So they don't want to admit that they don't know something, right? I got this 8-year-old kid. She had to take an interview for a very private, exclusive school, and she had to take a math test, and she was totally freaked out about math. Well, came to find out, long story short, the reason she was so freaked out about math, she was afraid to say, I don't understand this. Okay? When I coach the parents and the teacher and the kid, that saying, I don't understand is exactly the right thing to do, the whole problem cleared up. Okay? So our culture is so geared to, hey, we're a peer, like I've got it, I'm with it, you know. No, we're human beings, reminding ourselves it's a good thing. And you know, we all have issues, so deal with the issues.
Let me ask you guys a question, all three of you. Do you see any differences between, I'll say, between men and women, to simplify things, in terms of what we're talking about, confidence and so on, and between different cultural groups, perhaps?
Well, the first part of it is a big booby trap, Eric, because I mean, I wouldn't weigh in on that in 5 years, so I'm not going to answer that question. No, the answer is no. Categorically, no, I don't see a difference. In terms of different groups, that's a potent question, actually. I mean, we were talking before, I spend a good deal of time in India. And in South, and my wife is from Hong Kong. In Asian cultures, the parent pressure is definitely more pronounced generally than in Western culture. It's still in Western culture, but it's really apparent. I don't know if you would agree, Krithika, but I think, you know, parental pressure is very, very powerful.
And yeah, I would definitely agree. Like, especially, and that's what I was alluding to, certain overly represented applicant pools, which have get so much more in a test than the average. So, for example, the average would be say 530, 540 in older GMAT, and like saying the world, but in India it would be like much, much higher, like so much more higher.
Right.
And even if you get a high score, that's not sufficient. So that is something that we see pulls back people because they know that they have a high bar to jump over.
Yeah.
And that's something that holds back people, and you know, it's helping them shift that mindset towards and making sure that they're still able to put the effort where they need to put it. So yeah, I would say that it is a lot of pressure from a lot of people, you know, because it's not enough to just get above average, but it's very much necessary to get a score like which is in the 98th percentile or higher.
You may be the first person from your village to go beyond being in the village, you know, and the amount of intensity of pressure is huge. So yeah.
Bara, I don't know if you want to weigh in on the possible gender divide, but it's funny because just earlier today I was looking at a previous episode of MBA Waves where we had Meg Stefani, who's going to be on again, I think, in a couple of weeks. And she was on an episode. I wasn't there for that one for whatever reason. It was you, her, maybe Krithika. And it was about imposter syndrome.
Right.
There's a lot of similarities, right? I guess, you know, but she was really underscoring that more women seem to experience this. And it's probably linked to a whole host of things like gender roles in business and so forth. But I'm going to guess that more men have a hard time accepting help or admitting weakness because that's just kind of what men are just supposed to be, strong and never cry kind of thing.
Or more men have imposter syndrome, but they would never say so.
Exactly. Probably that's exactly.
I think that if we're going to get into the gender divide, I mean, I don't know. So much of it has to do with the teachers that you had and how those teachers responded to male or female students or a certain kind of attitude of students. I mean, there are so many factors. And I guess in terms of like the imposter syndrome or in terms of what Ben had said about not being afraid to ask a question, I was always the smart kid in my family. Like I was like the, you know, oh yeah, the great grades and doing all this stuff and so on and so forth. So I couldn't fail because the entire family was watching. And if I got like straight A's and a B, everyone would ask me about the B. And that got to be a lot of pressure. And that did create in me the sense of not being able to speak up when people are talking about something and I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know the person. I didn't recognize the cultural reference because I didn't want to look stupid because I had pressure all through my life that Scott's the one that knows the answers. And I'm sure that that is not exclusive to me, but to many, many students in one way or another. Someone has given them that pressure that like, what? You don't know the answer to this?
Yeah. Well, that's an early effect of schooling, right? When the teacher asks a question and one kid puts up their hand, and you think you know the answer, but you don't put up your hand because you're afraid to. I mean, those things go way back, and so like you're saying in families too.
Guys, I know we have to wrap it up because we have just about a minute left, and some of us have a hard stop. So, Ben, I know if you have to jump out, you can go at any time. Thank you very much for joining us. But before we wrap it up, is anyone else have anything they want to share about test anxiety? Final suggestions? Final pearls of wisdom?
Yeah, I want to say something about that. I think this is tied in with what we've been talking about. I really encourage people and talk to them about like, what is the meaning of this test for you right now in your life? Why? What purpose does it have in your life? It's not just about getting into business school. It's about your next step in your path. There's a learning opportunity in every moment of life. And if we really approach living as learning and growing, and you look at it you take 3 steps away and you say, what's going on here? What do I have to learn from this experience? Learn to calm down, learn to be more confident, focus better. Then you can take it away from just the test and the score to like, this is a part of your life. Most people, it's like life, test, life. It says it's not that way. How about life, test, life, test. We're facing every single day. So, to just try to neutralize that a little bit would be would be so, it is not just would be, it's so helpful, I find. Right. I'm speaking from my own life. I mean, I've had enormous tests in my life, not just all the tests I had to become a psychologist and teacher and all, but just the test of daily living. This is another test in this long series of tests, which we call life. So the more we can naturalize it, also helps to neutralize it somehow.
Yeah, and taking stock of your baseline of stress, like if you're always here, then that test day is going to be like you shouted before.
Well, also the other thing about that curve briefly is there's an optimal level of stress for everybody. But what happens with people who are, tend to be type A overachiever, you keep moving that normal high, optimal level further and further and further away. So you're taking on more and more and more, but it's really having a negative effect physically, mentally, spiritually, the whole shebang.
Amen. Scott, any final words of wisdom before we wrap it up?
I'm not really sure after everything that's been said. I would say there's definitely something which isn't so much anxiety, but maybe the reason that we have fear about things, which very frequently is not knowing. I mean, it's all over society, right? We fear what we don't know, what we don't understand. So the process is to get to know it, to understand it, to get a little bit closer to those things that you are afraid of, because the payoff is amazing of actually saying, I understood this exam. Maybe I didn't get the perfect score, but I got the score I needed. When you reach that point, you take it with you forever.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah, and I think I would just emphasize that making all of this enjoyable, right? Having the opportunity to look at it instead of something that, yes, these are hoops that you have to jump through, but how do you enjoy the ride? How do you turn it into an opportunity for self-growth, like you were talking about, Eric? How do you make it an enjoyable dance so that you become more fluid in all areas of your life, more make that journey fun and interesting, and have the challenge be something that teaches you something. It's all a metaphor of life. It's all metaphor of journey. So what tools do you need? And for some people be like, you know what, I'm stressed, so I need to exercise more. And that's going to be enough, so figure out what is your secret formula and work with professionals, work with friends, talk to friends, figure out what's going to make you happy in the journey. And happiness might be meeting challenges, but, figure out what you need to do to be your best self and to get out of your own way.
Absolutely. Well, that was 3 great bouts of wisdom there. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up today, but thanks to the 3 of you. Bara, you're always with us, but thanks to Ben and Scott for joining us as fantastic special guests today. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks to all the audience for listening. Hope it was helpful. Feel free to send us your questions either via the website, mbawaves.com. If you like today's episode, give us a nice thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to stay on top of all the latest and greatest happening in the world of business and education. And to check out the upcoming schedule, once again, mbawaves.com. Bye, everyone.